How do you go from being one of the most celebrated faces in the world to being left with nothing?
I would love to just be able to be sad and miss him, and not also feel this incredible hurt at his betrayal.
Paulina Porizkova was the supermodel who had it all: Vogue covers, million-dollar contracts, a marriage to a rock star. From the outside, she was untouchable, but her story was never just about beauty. It was about a childhood shaped by abandonment, a love that turned into isolation, and, in the end, a betrayal so shocking it made headlines around the world. So what really happened to the woman once called the most beautiful in the world? And why does her downfall still feel like one of fashion's most heartbreaking stories? Paulina Porizkova's story began far from the runways of Paris or the covers of American magazines. Born in Czechoslovakia in 1965, she grew up in a world marked by political upheaval and personal absence. Her parents fled the country during the Soviet invasion, leaving Paulina behind to be raised by her grandmother. For years, she felt like an unwanted child, and it planted the seed of a belief she would carry into adulthood, that love had to be earned. But everything changed when at just 15, a friend submitted her photos to a modeling agency. Almost overnight, Paulina found herself in Paris, chasing a dream she hadn't even imagined for herself. At first, the doors stayed closed. Too foreign, too unconventional, too far from the blonde, all-American ideal. Yet what others dismissed became her advantage. Her striking cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and quiet European elegance gave her a look that stood apart. And slowly, Paris began to embrace her. Within just a few years, Paulina was everywhere. Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar. Her face became a staple on international covers. By the mid-1980s, she had landed the kind of contract most models only fantasized about. Estée Lauder signed her to a multi-million-dollar deal, making her one of the highest-paid models in the world. She was only in her early 20s, but already being called one of the most beautiful women alive. And yet, in her own words, beauty didn't feel like a blessing. "Fame puts us on top of a mountain," she once said. "You can be seen by everyone, but you're alone. It's cold, it's windy." It was the paradox of her career. She was seen by millions, photographed by the most famous names in fashion, adored by an industry that thrives on image. But even in those years of dazzling success, Paulina Porizkova felt the loneliness that came with being more image than person. That sense of isolation wasn't born on the runways. It began years earlier, in a childhood marked by separation and survival. Paulina was only a toddler when her parents fled communist Czechoslovakia, leaving her behind with her grandmother. For a young child, the absence was devastating. She grew up watching other children with their parents while she waited for ones who weren't there. What should have been an ordinary childhood was spent under the shadow of politics, with her family treated as pawns in a Cold War standoff. Newspapers covered their story, and even Sweden's Prime Minister Olof Palme intervened to pressure the government for a reunion. When Paulina was finally allowed to join her parents in Sweden, the damage had already been done. She carried the feeling of being unwanted, of having to prove she deserved love.
My parents left me when I was little. That sort of just stuck with me forever, that I'm really not that great. And as soon as you find out how not great I am, you will also leave me.
For Paulina, that wound never really healed. School didn't make it easier. She was bullied by classmates who mocked her looks, calling her ugly, and the words sank deep. In later interviews, she admitted, "I didn't believe I was beautiful." But the deeper wound ran even further.
I had gone through my childhood being extremely seen, but absolutely unheard. It's been sort of the bane of my existence.
Those early wounds, abandonment, ridicule, the pressure to earn approval, built a foundation that would shape her entire life. And behind it was a lesson she had internalized early. Affection wasn't something you were given. It was something you had to earn. "I had to tap dance for love," she once said, summing up the way she felt forced to perform to be accepted. They made her driven, ambitious, resilient. But they also meant that when love and belonging finally came, she clung to them with a desperation that would later make betrayal all the more devastating. Those early wounds made Paulina fiercely determined to hold on to love when she finally found it. And at 19, she thought she had. On the set of a music video, she met Rick Ocasek, the lead singer of The Cars. He was older, already married, and a rock star. But to Paulina, he represented something she had never known: safety, devotion, the promise that she would never be abandoned again. What began as infatuation quickly became permanence, and before long the two were inseparable. At the same time, her modeling career had never been stronger. The late 1980s crowned her as one of the most recognizable women in the world. She wasn't just appearing in Sports Illustrated's swimsuit issues. She was on their cover twice, a rare feat that cemented her status as one of the magazine's icons. And yet Paulina herself often described modeling in far less glamorous terms.
To me, a model, it's sort of like an apple, you know? It's like in a still life. I mean, people polish it up and they put it in the perfect spot and they light it and then they, paint it. And that's sort of what you do with, with a girl.
To the public, she was the most beautiful woman alive. But to her, modeling was always closer to a performance, one-dimensional, polished, and replaceable. Still, that performance made her one of the defining faces of the decade. She graced American Vogue, French Elle, Harper's Bazaar, sometimes in the same month. She walked for designers from Dior to Chanel, bridging the gap between high fashion and mainstream celebrity. And when Estée Lauder signed her to a contract worth millions, she became one of the best-paid models of her era, rivaling names like Cindy Crawford and Linda Evangelista. To the outside world, it looked like the ultimate fairy tale, the most beautiful woman alive, conquering fashion, married to a rock star. But behind the gloss, her reality was beginning to shift. As their marriage deepened, Rick began to downplay the very career that had built her independence. He dismissed modeling as superficial, as if it didn't matter. Slowly, Paulina stepped back from the industry, devoting herself more to family life while younger models took the spotlight. Friends drifted away, and her world narrowed until it revolved almost entirely around him. Later, she would describe herself as the captain of the ship, carrying the weight of their household while Rick grew increasingly resentful. The relationship that had once made her feel cherished began to feel confining. But the hardest chapter of her story hadn't even begun. By the late 2010s, Paulina and Rick were already living apart. After nearly 30 years of marriage, she had come to the painful realization that the relationship which once made her feel cherished had slowly left her isolated. She was beginning the process of separation, trying to redefine who she was outside of being his wife. Yet even during that time, she remained by his side. When Rick's health declined, Paulina was still caring for him, making meals, bringing him medicine, and helping him through recovery. Their bond had changed, but she had never walked away. Then, in September 2019, everything stopped. Rick passed away suddenly at home in New York, and it was Paulina who found him. In an instant, the man who had defined half of her life was gone, and with him, any chance of resolution between them. The shock deepened when his will was read. Paulina discovered that she had been cut out entirely. The document described her as having abandoned him, and for that reason, she was left with nothing. Years later, Paulina would still struggle to make sense of what happened.
I hope that it wasn't, and that it was just a bad business choice at the time because nobody expected him to die, least of all himself.
She chose to see it that way. Nothing more than a mistake. Bad advice, bad timing, the kind of careless decision no one thought would matter. But the emotional wound was harder to explain away.
I loved this man for 35 years, and it's hard for me to believe that had he thought a little more about it, that it would have been okay.
For a woman who had once been one of the highest paid models in the world, it wasn't the loss of money that cut deepest. It was the word itself. Abandonment. That single word reopened the deepest wound of her childhood. She had lived her life in fear of being left behind, and now, in writing, the man she had cared for until his final days had accused her of exactly that. The headlines were merciless. Supermodel left penniless. The public couldn't believe it. How could one of fashion's most famous faces, once paid millions to front Estee Lauder, be left with nothing after decades by her husband's side? Paulina herself admitted that, for a time, she couldn't even afford groceries. The financial shock was real, but the emotional betrayal was far worse. Eventually, New York law granted her a settlement, yet no amount of money could erase the scars, and that devastation would send her into the most unexpected chapter of her life. In the aftermath of Rick's death, Paulina was left trying to rebuild a life that no longer felt familiar. For decades, she had been defined as his wife and as a supermodel, but now she was neither. The betrayal in his will had shaken her sense of worth to its core, and she was suddenly navigating grief, financial strain, and a loss of identity all at once. Then came the pandemic, and with it, a silence that only made her isolation louder. Trapped at home and consumed by mourning, she turned to the one outlet she had never used before: social media. On Instagram, she began posting photos of herself in tears, writing candid captions about loneliness, heartbreak, and the emptiness she felt. For a woman once celebrated for her beauty, it was a radical act, showing herself not glamorous or retouched, but broken. And the reaction followed almost instantly. Headlines nicknamed her the lady who cries on Instagram, a label meant to mock, but in reality, revealing something deeper. For the first time, Paulina was not just being looked at, she was being listened to. She later explained it simply. "That was me drowning. You watched me struggle to stay alive." Audiences connected with it. Thousands of people responded to her posts, sharing their own grief, their own betrayals, their own fears of growing older and being invisible. What had started as Paulina's attempt to survive became a community, a mirror that showed her she wasn't alone. That raw honesty laid the foundation for her next chapter. In 2022, she published No Filter, a book of essays that blended memoir with manifesto. It was not the glossy supermodel tell-all people expected, but instead a collection of reflections on love, betrayal, aging, and invisibility. In its pages, she spoke with the same unvarnished candor she had shown online, writing, "Being heard is better than being seen." For a woman whose face had once been her currency, that line cut to the heart of her reinvention. The young Paulina had been seen everywhere, on billboards, on magazine covers, on runways. But being heard, being taken seriously for her words and her experience, was something the industry had rarely granted her. She also spoke openly about how much the culture around beauty had shifted, and how much it hadn't. Reflecting on her early career, she noted, "Harassment used to be called compliments." The statement landed differently coming from her, because it wasn't abstract. It was testimony from someone who had lived through the very era when models were treated as objects, not as people. For the first time, her identity as a model gave her story more weight, not less. By contrasting her younger self, the woman once labeled the most beautiful in the world, with her current self, scarred but unfiltered, she revealed the hidden cost of beauty. And, in doing so, she reintroduced herself not as an icon of the past, but as a voice for the present. What began as mourning turned into momentum, and it carried Paulina back in front of the camera. In 2024, she joined Sports Illustrated's Swimsuit Legends portfolio, photographed alongside names like Christy Brinkley and Tyra Banks. At nearly 60, she posed in a swimsuit not as a fantasy of youth, but as a reminder that beauty doesn't disappear when women age. For Paulina, it wasn't about reclaiming a title. It was about redefining who got to be seen. And then came the moment no one had expected. In 2025, Estée Lauder welcomed her back as a global ambassador. The same brand that had once made her one of the highest-paid models in the world now featured her again, this time promoting its revitalizing Supreme Plus line. The images were polished, but the context was different. She wasn't just a face for flawless skin. She was proof that visibility could extend beyond the years when fashion typically erases women. For Paulina, it marked a kind of full circle. Decades earlier, she had been celebrated for her youth and perfection. Now she was being embraced for her resilience and honesty. And unlike the girl who once felt voiceless in front of the lens, the woman in these new campaigns had already proven she could make herself heard. It's rare for a supermodel story to stretch this far, rarer still for it to evolve into something more than image. Paulina Porizkova's life has been defined by beauty, betrayal, survival, and reinvention. She has been both pedestal and cautionary tale, but now she seems to stand most firmly as a voice. So the question is, what do we really remember her for? The face that once defined an era, or the honesty that forced us to look past it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.